Good morning, everyone. We will wait a few more seconds for more people to hop into the webinar before we begin. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning for our webinar. Today, we've got a really great team collaborating together to provide some advice and insights on what to expect this coming year for trends in the technology world that could impact your business. So some stage setting items I want to cover before we really begin. A quick introduction to myself. My name is Caroline Wood, and I work at NetGain Technologies as a marketing administrator, and I am going to be playing the role of moderator in the webinar today. Questions are encouraged throughout the webinar. You can use the question option in GoToWebinar to submit any sort of comments or questions or even feedback during the webinar. And a recorded version of this webinar and the presentation is going to be sent to everybody, and it's going to be made available on the NetGain website. And we're going to be sharing all of those details once the content is rendered and available within the next couple of days. Finally, if you've got any questions about the content or topics we cover in this webinar, please feel free to reach out. If you think of maybe a question after the fact, or you come out with some takeaways, please feel free to touch base with us. We'd be happy to meet with you or share some additional content and information about these topics and more. So let's get this panel party started. I will begin with some general introductions to our panel team first. We've got representatives from different fields of expertise in the technology world, and their professional experience is going to help paint sort of a diverse picture of what to expect for technology for businesses in the coming year. So let's go around the room, and I will let them introduce themselves, their background, and their roles within IT and their specific jobs that they work in. So I am going to give the floor to Brennan Clinch first. Brennan?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Carolyn. My name is Brennan Clinch. I am a channel SC working at Aruba, part of HPE. And my role here, I've been here for about a year and a half on this side of things. Before that, I was with a partner. It was not NetGain, but it was a partner like NetGain. And so obviously I've spent a lot of time working with customers and know a lot of the pain points as well. And I'm enjoying my time here working with our partners.
Appreciate it, Brennan. We are super excited to have you with us. Our next panelist is NetGain's Scott Logan. Scott?
Hey, thanks, Caroline. My name is Scott Logan. I am the Director of Security for NetGain Technologies. I've been with NetGain now for a little over 13 years and provide security services and solutions for NetGain as an MSP, but also security solutions and directions for clients associated to NetGain. So I really look forward to today's conversation.
Appreciate it, Scott. And last but certainly not least, John Adams.
Yes, thank you, Caroline, and thank you all for attending today. I hope you all leave here 1 hour from now a little bit better than when you joined. My name is John Adams, and I am the Director of Professional Services at NetGain. I lead a team of incredibly talented engineers that architect and deploy complex projects for our current client base and any other companies that exist in our world.
Thank you, John. So now that we've introduced the team, let's move into the actual content of this webinar. So as I stated earlier, we're here to talk about trends in tech for 2023 and some of the opportunities and even some changes we've been facing and will face this coming year. So some of the headlines we've seen on the front pages of websites, news articles, news media channels lately are similar to what we've been seeing over the past year. The struggles continue. So we've had supply chain disruptions nationally and internationally. We're still experiencing some shifts in the job market. The word recession has been tossed frankly, into like every other headline. And now we're seeing some other terms being tossed in there too for inflation, stagflation, all of that. So get excited. COVID-19 is still around, unsurprisingly. So we're still dealing with some health and wellness and safety challenges with that. Cybersecurity is probably never going to go away. So that's always a trend. And really the list goes on. And unfortunately, many of these trends are being forecasted well into 2023. So we could probably run this webinar and discussion all day about these trends, but since time is limited, we are going to focus our discussion today on 4 specific trends. So to begin with, we'll discuss IT infrastructure and end-of-life devices. This is going to be impacting businesses really early next year with Microsoft's end-of-life schedule. And that's even being felt towards the end of this year too, as they're starting to roll out those dates for end-of-life devices. We're going to touch on cloud trends. Businesses need access to data and information from anywhere today. So we'll talk about the best ways for how companies should be moving to the cloud. We'll talk about cybersecurity. This is not a trend. This is an aspect of society, and it's ever shifting. So we're going to touch on what's the most recent developments and some of the current threat landscape trends that are pertinent to businesses, frankly, in every industry. And last but not least, we will touch on the modern workforce. Workforces are all over the place now, hybrid, remote, but increasingly in the office. So we'll discuss some of those recent shifts, as well as some of the maybe the generational gaps we're also experiencing in the modern workforce today, and how to potentially bridge those gaps. So while these topics are quite different, they all relate in some form or fashion. So we will likely be discussing aspects of each of them in each of these segments. So, for example, how cloud is playing into the modern workforce development, or even how IT infrastructure can relate to cybersecurity. So we'll be discussing all of these topics, also to the extent of how they interrelate with one another. So let's actually get into the meat of things. So we'll start with IT infrastructure and end-of-life devices. And I'm going to hand this topic over to John Adams first, as he has some valuable experience and insights with this in particular through a lot of the project work and client support that he facilitates. John, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. So when we talk about end of life, that means that the device is no longer supported. There's no updates. Nothing's being actively worked on there. So before we get to end of life, I want to go over kind of the normal flow that software or device has when it's released. So one of the big ones that we're seeing right now is Windows Server 2012. That is coming end of life October 23 of next year. So we have a lot of clients that are looking to upgrade that. But just to fill you in, so when Server 2012 came out, it was inside something called mainstream support. And that's when Microsoft provides new releases, updates, service packs, builds, fixes, and patches in order to enhance the product security, reliability, close vulnerability, and fix problems. So during this time, Microsoft also provides non-security updates that enhance the product. So that could be its design or functionality, and it also accepts requests from users like you for features or design changes. And at this point, it's still honoring all of its warranty claims. This is normally about a 5-year period. So after we finish with mainstream support, we go into something called extended support. So extended support also typically lasts about 5 years from the end of mainstream support. And during extended support, Microsoft continues to provide security and reliability updates, bug fixes, but non-security updates are not provided without some type of paid support agreement. So during extended support, Microsoft does not accept requests for new features or product design changes or honor warranty claims. So now that we've gone through those two support structures, we get to end of life. So At end of life, the device is no longer supported. They have no engineers working to make it a better product. They have nobody working to fix bugs with it or add features. So if something bad happened, say in 2024, and you had this 2012 server, say it was a 0-day threat, Microsoft will do nothing to update those systems, and they can easily fall victim to an attack. And we've seen this where attackers are waiting for a product to go end of life because they know there won't be any patching. And then they'll go ahead and do one of their attacks that they've been holding on to for a while. So in this talk, we're going to touch on cybersecurity insurance. But one thing to know is cybersecurity insurance will cost you far more if you're using outdated systems. You'll pay a surcharge on it, or they may just not be able to provide insurance to you due to the risk. So I recommend that instead of paying those huge surcharges and putting yourself at risk, it is strongly recommended to keep your devices up to date with current and supported software and devices. One other thing I wanted to bring up about end of life is your budget. So a lot of clients, a lot of businesses just in general make these purchases without thinking about an end of life date on it. So when you're building your budgets, you should consider putting something on there 5 years out that kind of considers the cost of upgrading these end of life devices. So businesses are not hit out of nowhere with a large upgrade or replacement fee down the road. So I just used Windows Server in my example as a software and operating system that is a huge thing right now. But when it comes to the devices, I'm hoping that Brendan can give us some more details from his and Aruba's perspective.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you, John. Honestly, yeah, that you hit the nail on the head as far as sort of the threat landscape that comes when you're talking about end of life devices, and certainly from a manufacturer's perspective, you know, we obviously encourage everyone. Again, at this point in time in technology, 5 years is it's sadly, but it's a pretty good life, right? On any sort of IT device. One of the things I think, one of the trends that I see, and it's not just us, it's pretty much just about every major technology manufacturer. But one of the things you can start to look at in terms of managing this kind of thing is to look at the operational models, the consumption models, the kind of as a service models that try to have this sort of refresh built in, right? So that it's more on our plate as the manufacturer to be keeping our end updated as much as possible to keep that off of your all shoulders as the customers. That said, you know, that's still a transition period, right? We're transitioning from data centers to cloud, and now that we're a little bit more heavy into cloud, you know, as a service is becoming more of an option. So that is also a slow transformation. So in the interim, if that's not an option, it is important, as John said, I think critically important to make sure that yes, that 5-year cycle, or at least, you know, 3 to 5 year cycle is built into your budgeting and your operational plans and expenses.
Now, both John and Brennan weighed in on you know, some things to anticipate, especially as it pertains to cybersecurity too. So Scott, I'm going to toss this over to you now. How do end-of-life devices play into the security posture of businesses, and maybe what are some tips or key points that people should be aware of as it pertains to cybersecurity and end-of-life?
Sure, Caroline. John and Brennan were correct in the fact that these end-of-life devices no longer can get any level of updating, any level of patching, any security updates. This creates an immediate vulnerability in your enterprise. Having an asset that is no longer under support creates an enormous vertical for attack in your network. And if those devices are forward-facing, even more so. So it's enormously important to make focus on not having any devices in your network that are not constantly able to get updates and stay able to repel any type of threat based on some type of security signature that can be addressed through a normal patch presence. Now, here's the other thing. An enormous amount of businesses have legacy applications that will only run on the operating system that they exist on. That if it's sitting on a 2008 server or sitting on a 2012 server, that's where it has to work. The third party that supports it no longer supports it, will no longer improve it to run on any other level of operating system. So now you're stuck with it. You're stuck with this legacy machine that you're very dependent on for your operations, but it can't get patched. What do I need to do? Well, you need to segregate it. You need to isolate it into its own VLAN so that if it is impacted, if it is threatened, that it cannot spread that threat throughout the rest of your enterprise. That's very important if you have to keep it. Cyber insurance, as John stated, is going to be impacted by having these in your enterprise. If you can show the level of segregation by moving those into an isolated VLAN so that it can't impact the rest of your network, that may help. Having the ability to keep that whatever that system is, whatever that application is, deployed in your network. So it's very threatening to your network. There are things that you can do if you have to keep it, but as John and Brendan both said, it's in your best interest to move those out of your enterprise as soon as possible.
I appreciate it, Scott. Now, one last quick note, and I want to toss this back to John. John, if your device fails and it's end of life, what can you do? What are some like short-term immediate options that somebody could take?
That's going to be tricky right now with the issues that we're having with supply chain. So depending on the failure, your only option may be to purchase new equipment. And if that's the case, with the delays that we're seeing, it could have you down for weeks or months before a replacement is found. So the risk of that happening could significantly slow or stop your business's productivity, cause a bunch of anxiety in your teams, and you may even spend twice as much for a device to replace it if that is the only device that's available to ship. So with security concerns that Scott and Brendan and I just mentioned, it feels very wise to get your devices up to date and don't let them go end of life.
Fair points, John. I'm thoroughly alert and a little scared. So on that note, I'm going to transition our topic to the cloud. So I'd like for the team to share some of their opinions and insights on the cloud and what changes we should expect for businesses this coming year in terms of maybe some new developments that organizations should be aware of as they seek to leverage more cloud services and tools. And I am going to toss this back over to John again. So John, how are you seeing clients leverage cloud services, with the NetGain? And maybe like a follow-up question would be maybe more in general, like why are SMBs moving to the cloud more?
Gotcha. So with the current work environment that we have, a lot of our tools are already in the cloud. And there are still some businesses that have not yet made any leap. And so they're starting to do that more and more. It's very hard to find a business that doesn't have some type of cloud services. But as I mentioned with the end of life devices, right now we're seeing a lot of cloud work due to that Windows 2012 end of life. So businesses, as I mentioned, are working remote or some type of hybrid model. And there's just a greater need for their servers and data to be in a central location that's accessible and redundant throughout the world. So once that data is in the cloud, it can be replicated throughout data centers in the world and ensure it's protected from even the worst type of disasters. So businesses going to the cloud right now are seeing better reliability, enhanced disaster recovery, cost reduction, and better collaboration benefits, just to name a few of them. But when moving to the cloud, costs need to be considered, both the initial cost of the migration and also the costs of your services in a public cloud like Azure or AWS. So cloud services often run on a utility billing model where you only pay for what you are using. So some of our clients favor this OpEx model over a large CapEx expense. And it's a little bit easier for them to manage on their books, and they don't have to pony up, $20,000 for new server infrastructure. So now they're just getting a monthly bill where they're able to scale it up or down as their needs change. So to ensure that we're giving our clients accurate estimates to move them to the cloud, we make use of cloud assessments that allow us to gather data on your systems, the networks, their size, how much bandwidth they use, what type of compute, and how all the systems are accessed. We then use this data to create proposals and provide them to our clients. So since it is a utility billing model, it's hard for us to accurately predict the amount it's going to cost every month, but we can get very close by using some of these assessment tools. And then other than moving infrastructure to the cloud, which we're seeing a ton, but we're also seeing a lot of work in cloud backups and disaster recovery. So following a crisis, cloud backups enable us to restore any impacted data and restart normal operations as fast as possible. So a normal backup to the cloud is adequate, but what we're seeing a lot is a full DR solution. So cloud disaster recovery is basically a cloud-based solution that integrates a number of different backup methods and services to protect your resources, like your data, your programs, your configurations. This would mean that if something tragic happened to your business, say all your servers blew up, God forbid, we would be able to bring that client back to fully operational within a few hours. So traditional backups in the cloud would still suffice, but again, that return to operation would take much longer, as there's a potential you need to source new hardware, pull the backups back to that location, then restore the backups. And of course, there's time lost during that. But keeping the backups in an environment like Azure, we are an Azure shop. That's what we do a lot of our work in. We're able to restore those machines much quicker and then simply rebuild network connections to your users. So since the data is already up there and it has the ability to create servers, we can easily take that data that's already on Microsoft servers and build virtual servers from there. So in that scenario, we could have you guys back up and running in a matter of hours instead of days or weeks.
Yeah, appreciate it, John. Now I'm going to toss this over to Brennan really quick. Can you share some insights around cloud services based on some of the work that you do and your background with HPE Aruba?
Yeah, sure. I use an acronym that people find entertaining, if not memorable, but I tell them to make their network SAD, which basically means secure, automate, and delegate, right? And like I said, it's not really SAD, but that'll help you remember it, right? Secure, automate, and delegate. So obviously, we're touching a lot on security, and certainly we'll probably talk about that a bit more when it comes to the cloud. But really, what cloud brings, in my opinion, to the forefront is that those last two parts, which is automation and delegation. As John mentioned, with everybody in the same situation. And Caroline, you said it at the beginning, right? We're all kind of staring down the situation as it stands. None of us have stars in our eyes about what it is. We know what's on the horizon, and currently really what we're dealing with now. And have been dealing with, right, for the last few years. So that said, I think we can all look at this realistically and say, yeah, I mean, the more I can take off of my plate financially, operationally, and still make it secure. I mean, John really touched on probably the most critical thing, which is if you go down and you are very reliant on on-premise, appliances and things like that, that can be a problem right now with our supply chain issues. And so, yes, when I say automate and delegate, that's where I say yes. Go into the cloud as much as you possibly can, making sure you're secure. And the best way to do that is to then delegate, which is to say, let the folks at NetGain, people like Scott, people like John, whose job it is to look after, networks professionally all day, every day, and hand it over to them and say, help me do this securely and in the right way, so that I'm not in that situation. I don't find myself spending, double what my budget was because of some sort of breach, or, redundancy. So that's, in my opinion, I mean, we build our platforms, right, on the cloud. Our cloud platforms, as John mentioned, we have a lot of faith in Azure as well. We tie into Azure for a lot of our AD stuff in our cloud platforms. So certainly, if you haven't taken it seriously, I think we're right on that doorstep where it really needs to be an option for you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Brennan. Now, once again, both of you have touched on security. So, Scott, back in the seat, can you provide maybe some couple of key insights on how security really plays into cloud services and setups?
Sure, Caroline. Caroline, a lot of businesses still like to hug their data. They feel like they're able to secure it more, protect it more if it's under their watch, under their roof. And there's been some reluctancy to move to the cloud. A few years ago, that may have had some water, but not anymore. The cloud has certainly improved its security posture in its ability. It's achieved and met all the compliance requirements for HIPAA and other very strenuous client compliance requirements. And so this is something now that businesses are now starting to consider more and more and more. But word of caution, word of point of interest is that by itself, out of the box, the cloud is not secure. The cloud requires security controls to be enabled, to be leveraged, so that as you lift and shift your infrastructure up into Azure, up into AWS, that you're actually implementing security controls. It's not implemented by default. You have to properly structure those security controls, and some require specific licenses in order to associate the security controls. So make sure that as you practice moving your infrastructure up into the cloud, that you're leveraging the security controls to protect it, and that you've acquired the licenses that will enable the posturing of security so that you can properly protect what you move into the cloud. Remember, the cloud is not some mystical thing. It is just somebody else's infrastructure. And so make sure that you're leveraging the security in that new infrastructure where you're placing your trust for your systems and your business.
Appreciate it, Scott. And that guides us right into our next topic. Get excited, Scott. I would say that cybersecurity, it really isn't so much of a trend. It's more of like a facet of the technology industry, especially because it's just constantly shifting. So this is a topic that's been on everyone's mind in 2022 with some of these major breaches that have hit companies and headlines, and even new compliance measures that are being implemented in many industries. So tossing this back over to you, Scott, as our cybersecurity expert on deck today. What do you have to say about cybersecurity trends end of this year and coming into 2023?
Whew, man, you're giving me the floor. I could probably talk the rest of the webinar. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to narrow this down and just talk about a few things that are probably very important in the cybersecurity realm in 2022 and as we go into 2023. We'll start with ransomware. Ransomware never really went away, and it actually got larger in 2022, and I anticipate in 2023 it'll even become more focused, especially as like nation state affairs are introducing malware that is a nice channel for ransomware infection to infect systems. As that exists overseas, once malware is released, it really has no borders. It will come across seas and enter into the US and affect organizations on our side. So ransomware is just a different animal nowadays. Back in the old days, it used to be an infection that encrypted data, and then they held it hostage and insisted money to get it back. Now it's more destructive. Now it actually, when it gets deployed, it's shutting down your antivirus system so it avoids detection. It goes after your backups and tries to eliminate those as a recoverable model. So now you're more inclined to possibly pay the ransom to get your data back. It is just so destructive for organizations right now that I don't think that there's going to be a decline in this, and so organizations really need to make sure that they practice certain controls to stay safe. 0 days that exist out there are once again avenues for how ransomware can get into your enterprise. So you have to stay focused on your environment. Number two, probably social awareness. The end user being the weakest link in the security chain is still a thing, and it's going to continue to be a thing, especially as we have moved into a remote workforce position for most organizations that are either hybrid or completely remote. When that happened, the end user in a mindset kind of left the business mindset, went back home, started to get relaxed, and became more subject to phishing attacks and certain threats that are educated through phishing, vishing, smishing types of attacks. And that's unfortunate, but it is the way it is. So the only way that you can be protective of this through outside of spam filters and other types of controls that you can put on email platforms is the improvement of the end user's understanding about what to pay attention to, what to look for, how to be alert, and what am I supposed to do if something comes across my screen and is threatening. What those processes are certainly is the requirement of the business to train the users, and I think we're going to continue to see that type of threat leveraged against organizations through their users. So social awareness testing and training certainly is going to be very important, continued through 2023. And I think the last one I'm going to talk on is supply chain attacks. This is an elevation of attack where a third party that you're associated to that may have an influence into your environment, maybe they have a remote connection so that they can maintain an application or support your systems. Those types of attacks are becoming more and more frequent where they're impacted and it impacts you. You weren't directly impacted, they were, and they had an access into your infrastructure. So vendor due diligence is going to become a requirement for businesses to maintain proper understanding about what they are practicing to stay secure in ordinance to have access to your network. And this is another cyber insurance posture that John mentioned earlier about end-of-life devices being affected cyber insurance. So is this. If you're not practicing good vendor due diligence, you're going to get black flagged on your cyber insurance and their rates are going to go up enormously, or you may not be insurable at all. So make sure that you're practicing good understanding about what your third parties, what your vendors are that you're dependent on to support your systems are doing with their cyber posture and what they are supposed to be doing to protect your enterprise. Make sure you understand that.
Appreciate it, Scott. Yeah, lots of great takeaways from that. Brennan, what are your thoughts on security trends for the coming year? And maybe what do you see as some of the top cyber threats in your mind for potential risks facing businesses?
Absolutely. Yeah, I first let me speak to Scott's point there that he made at the end about making sure that you're dealing with vendors who are doing their due diligence. And the question might naturally come up, well, how do I know, that they're doing their due diligence? How can I tell what everybody says they're doing their due diligence? How do I actually know? And my answer, this isn't just a plug for the sake of a plug. This is my actual answer that I tell people all the time is work with your partner, work with NetGain. They have so much more to lose by recommending bad, vendors because they have so many, customers that they need to attend to. So if they're selling bad things, obviously it's going to come back on them and people won't work with them. So it behooves partners to work with really good vendors that are vetted. So what I'd say is heavily lean on Scott, lean on John, lean on all of your NetGain team members to help consult in these kind of decisions, because that is exactly what they're here to do. They're here to make those judgment calls for you because they have the experience and the know-how with all of the different vendors to say, yes, this one does this better than this one, exhibit A, exhibit B. So, that point aside, that's an absolutely crucial point that Scott made. I'm just going to work my way backwards through Scott's points. When it comes to, the user education, he is spot on in that I can't stress enough how important it is to run even some simple, fake phishing campaigns within your company, just as an educational exercise. when we were talking about this webinar, when we were even planning it, I made a confession to these guys that I'll make to you all on the call now, which is that even me, somebody who's been in networking and security for well over a decade at this point, HPE runs, as a good security vendor company should do, they run these test phishing emails to our company, right? At least a couple times a quarter. We'll get these emails that are fake phishing attempts to try and see how many of the workforce is prone to this kind of thing. And I clicked on one time. They've sent about 6 to 8 since I've been started, and I've caught most of them. But the one I clicked on because it seemed like it was legitimate. It seemed like it was coming from within the company. And I clicked on it, and I got notified right away. Hey, you just clicked on a potential phishing attack, right? This could have been a very malicious, could have been a very bad thing. So I would absolutely back up the point that says, yes, I don't care how well versed and experienced your users are in this field, they can always continue to have that awareness. You can bet your bottom dollar I've been hyper aware of it since that, and that's the good reminder, right? That keeps us all on our toes, make sure that we're paying attention, which kind of speaks to one of the final points, which is to say, as these guys were talking, one of the things you can do is to be aware that security is more than a firewall. I know that I don't mean to be condescending if this is just obvious to you, but I do want to make you aware. Like, a lot of folks say, well, I've paid for a really good firewall. And it's like, hey, listen, that is the beginning, right? That's your gate. But the firewall, if you've only got it on site, that's not going to help your remote workers. And even once you're in, most of the threats that are happening now are happening, like we've mentioned, either through a compromised user. Most of the time it is through a compromised user or an IoT device. So you have to think of security less as an entry point gateway and more as a everywhere, right? Every single place. We have a product we sell called ClearPass, which is network access control. Network access control, you've probably heard of it over the years, but basically it's designed to help give you the zero trust model, where everybody always has to prove who they are when they get on the network, and they only get access to the things that they need access to. This is just basic segregation, because let's say you get a compromised user, they can get through your firewall. They're authorized, right? And it might not be an issue of getting out to the internet. It might be an issue of accessing financial servers that are inside the network. So there's no reason that the network engineers like myself should have access to the CFO office, right? And the kind of resources that they have access to. So again, I think it's important to think of security less as a perimeter breach at this point, and think of it more as a device by device, context by context type of situation, that you have to make sure that you are securing all of your connections at a device level, including your IoT, and make sure you have policies built around that.
And Caroline, Brendan's referring to layered protection, layered security, where you're not just
doorways between access points, right?
Yeah, you're not just securing the perimeter, you're securing it at the network level, you're securing it at the server level, you're securing it at the application level, at the endpoint level. You have to secure it at so many different levels, so that if something does get in, there is other stop gates that will stop it from moving across the network.
Right. Yeah, appreciate that. John, do you have anything additional that you'd like to add to this discussion point on cybersecurity?
Oh, I do. I think both Brendan and Scott did an incredible job of highlighting some of these. And as Scott said, I think we can all speak about security for the next couple hours, because it's just such a big part of our lives. So Brendan's call out on having NetGain and your vendors assist you in some of these security needs. This is the world that we live in every single day and deal with every single day. So a lot of the work that we see coming to us is from other businesses that maybe had in-house IT or they had a different provider, and then something happened where a large breach took place, and then they end up reaching out to us. Everything's on fire, and they need somebody that has this experience to kind of not only fix the problem, but then secure it so this type of problem doesn't happen before. So as Scott mentioned, these services in the cloud don't come with great security settings already enabled. So we see people just set them up and then something happens and then we end up fixing it. So we've had to change or perfect our deployment processes and include custom security policies that lock down systems, lock down access, just to protect the business. And I understand that some of these security practices can be tedious to businesses and their users. But in the world we live in now, they're a must to ensure that not only your business data is safe, your client data is safe, but also your personal information. You know, the businesses have a lot of personal information on their employees, their families, so we want to protect that. And another thing I wanted to note that Scott had brought up about ransomware, you know, these are getting far more complex. And Brendan's correct about firewalls just not being enough anymore. And one other layer that we do need to protect, and as I mentioned before, is the backups. So we can do everything to protect your systems. We can set up all these great things, but still, as Scott mentioned, with social awareness, sometimes the end user is the weakest link. So things can still happen. And as ransomware becomes more complex, it can infect your backups. So something can happen, you can assume that we're good because the backups, but those backups can be infected as well. So we've been deploying a lot of air-gapped and data immutability backups for our clients. So even if the worst thing happens, that data is accurate and it's unable to be changed. So it gives the businesses confidence knowing that their data is safe regardless of what happens to it. And one last thing, I know we're a little bit over, but
it's okay, John, it's okay, quick.
We had spoken about the cybersecurity insurance. And we've seen this where businesses just really don't want to do the MFA. People don't want to use their cell phones. They don't want to provide cell phones. And we've seen on cybersecurity insurance, their monthly fee going up $500 or more just because MFA is not enabled. And that's if the provider actually insures you. So if you consider that $5,000 cost over 12 months, we're looking at $6,000 that you'd be paying in penalties. But we can actually do that project and deployment for under that cost. So by go ahead and just dealing with these security issues, you're now secure, your rates are better, the whole business is better. So,
yeah. Well, one final comment that I'd like to make on MFA too is, you know, especially over the past year, cyber insurance is even more difficult to even qualify for and get, and it's more expensive now. There's more measures that you have to have in place to even get it. And that could be a measure, like if you don't have MFA, you might not even qualify for cyber insurance. So something else to be aware of. So I'm going to direct our panel now to our final topic, which is modern workforces. And I would like for our team to discuss how technology is playing into some of the employment challenges and changes that I presume everybody's experienced over the past year, and maybe some of their ideas for how this is going to play out in the coming year. So Brennan, I'm going to hand this topic to you first.
Thank you. I'll speak from a personal perspective and then from a vendor perspective. So just, you know, for those who might be on who are managers or hiring anybody that is going to be in your IT workforce. I'm about 33, so I'm on the older end of the millennial scale. And, you know, a lot of us have been in at this point for a little bit. We have pretty clear direction about where we're going with our career and such like that. However, you know, something you've probably noticed, and it's been made much more blatantly obvious and pushed forward by the pandemic, is the fact that one of the expectations of the newer workforces, of the newer hires, from my generation at least and below, is the sort of this expectation that remote work, flexible work is just sort of expected, right? And as much as that is able to be allowed, you know, if it's something that you can do, again, I would recommend looking at it. And again, this comes with all these considerations we've been talking about, but certainly that a lot of the modern workforce is in my age range and the new hires are even coming from now the Gen Zers who have even more expectation of this. So I think being aware of that, not necessarily being fully resistant to it just for the sake of it, but looking at what that looks like for this workforce. But that comes with the second part of where I'm putting my vendor hat back on and saying it does come with some security concerns. And so I think one of the things you have to do is look at how are we enabling that hybrid kind of workplace as we go forward. Right when the pandemic hit, I was still with my partner, and in fact, we got a huge influx of requests as an Aruba SE at this partner that I was with. All of a sudden, we were getting calls coming in. We have these things called remote access points, which basically function as a wireless access point that somebody could put up at their house or in the shared co-office that they're going to, whatever. And it broadcasts, it builds a tunnel across the internet, secures that tunnel to a a gateway that we've got sitting again either in the cloud or at somebody's hybrid data center, and it's securing that connection and it's broadcasting the SSID basically from that secure data center, so that what they're experiencing at home is not necessarily home Wi-Fi. It's more like they're actually sitting in the office. So there's a way that you can still protect your data and still enable remote workers while still keeping everything secure, and enabling you to go forward. So I just, those are the 2 points that I think when it comes to modern workforces to be aware of.
Appreciate it, Brennan. Scott, would love for you to weigh in on this topic too. Maybe what are some trends that you've been experiencing yourself with your own team?
Yeah, I'm just real quick on what Brendan just mentioned in that hybrid work space, the security controls that are required to properly protect your organization when they're in a remote workspace is so important to set up. They're normally, when they're working at home, they're working on a lesser firewall, probably something off of a Walmart shelf. Their wireless network is probably not as strong as it needs to be. They're probably sharing resources with other family members, and now they have avenues into your private network. A lot of security controls that Brandon was just mentioning is so important when we're talking about a remote workspace or a hybrid workforce. It's just, I just can't emphasize enough the importance of establishing good, proper cyber hygiene for the remote workforce and make sure that that's practiced. One of the things that I've kind of noticed, and you mentioned my own experience with my own teams and stuff, is I'm kind of old school. I've been around on the planet for a while now, and I'm kind of used to the longevity of work, staying with something for a long period of time and doing what I'm supposed to do. The younger workforce is much more aggressive. They want to conquer something, whatever is laid out in front of them, and then move on to the next thing. And whether that's a change or an improvement within their own organization, or whether that's to move out of the organization to somewhere else, those things happen. And so I think there needs to be a strategy around hiring when you're thinking about how you're going to protect your infrastructure, how you're going to protect your organization. Make sure that you organize job roles and job requirements around the anticipation that this is the way the workforce works now. They're going to conquer, they're going to move on, and that's just something that if you know that that's how it's going to work and how it's going to happen, you can start anticipating that and building your job roles and job securities around that.
Appreciate it, Scott. John, you interface with a number of departments of NetGain, as well as diverse group of businesses, through the clients that we support. So, what's your perspective on some of the opportunities and challenges that we're encountering with today's workforce?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to hit on one of the big ones, and it's bringing people back into the office. So, this is always a top of conversation amongst business leaders, because it's been challenging to get people back into the office, and there is no clear strategy on how to do this, and every business runs different. So if you are planning to bring people back into the office, just know that there'll probably be failures in those attempts. If there was a perfect solution, we'd have it, but we still don't have one. So I think it makes sense to make an attempt at it, but learn from the failures from yourself and others to perfect that plan. And then also truly ask yourself and your leaders if it's necessary to have people back in the office. If it's human interaction that everyone's searching for, so we can get away from this, just video chat, just these faces on a screen, where we can find ourselves to be very solid coworkers. And I know I hear this, work acquaintances. They may be on the same team, but they only see each other as acquaintances because they haven't had any real experiences together in the human form. So, ask yourself if it is necessary. And really, as I drive through some of these cities and I see all these great buildings that are mostly empty, I think, gosh, that's so much space, that's so much power. And I know people consider some of these hybrid approaches. I think you really need to decide if it's worth it to have that business running in that location. And so one thing that I've seen happening is, instead of paying rent on an office that's mostly empty, and like I said, you're paying for power and internet, you've moved everything up to the cloud, perhaps you can use those funds for that large get together, or multiple small get together, to let people reset and find camaraderie in a human form. So you could ditch that, I don't know, $100,000 a year lease and use those funds to have some incredible gatherings with your employees. I'm a proponent to get people back into the office, but I know it's a very delicate subject. You can see a lot of benefits in it, but also with this issue we're talking about, we do have an issue with the kind of generational gap. I kind of am like Brandon and fall kind of right in the middle with it. So I understand the perspective from some of the millennial generation, and I also understand the perspective from the older generation too. So you really have to, as managers and leaders, you really have to understand your employees and what is the best way to kind of deal with that. And I think these get-togethers, to share a beer with somebody, as long as they're of age, with somebody that may be 40 years older, is a very powerful thing. Or even to just play a very basic game of lawn darts with somebody, build such a tight relationship and bond. And the last thing I can say about that is, if you are a hybrid model or you are an in-house, as you hire, Scott mentioned hiring kind of the right people. So just be clear that you're an in-office business and that they're okay with that from the start, because as I mentioned, it's been challenging to bring people back in. So we need to just get in front of it right off the bat and make sure the person that you're hiring fits the model that you run your business.
I appreciate it, John. And I'm going to give our team a quick pause to gather themselves a bit. We've been talking quite a lot about these topics and more. And I am going to post a quick poll to our attendees. And this is also going to give me an opportunity to look through some of the questions that we've had come in. So I'm going to give everybody a quick moment to answer the poll. Yeah, we've had a couple of questions. Okay. Oh, we've got a security one. So we're running close on time. So hopefully we can answer one or two of these questions. And I'll probably start with that security one first. So Scott, get ready, get excited. A couple more seconds and I'm going to close the poll. Okay, closing that. Okay, so we're going to take our last few minutes to answer some questions. So the first one I've got, someone mentioned zero-day attacks. How are we supposed to be preventive or protective of a zero-day attack? Scott, I am tossing this over to you, my friend.
Well, a zero-day attack means that there is no signature that's available to recognize the attack, that the attack is new. Sometimes it's inherited into the operating system where it was discovered that it was weak, and there's just no defenses that are set up to be able to identify it. So one of the things that most businesses can do to leverage against zero-day attacks is to incorporate some level of AI, machine learning controls that is able to identify by behavior when it sees something occurring in the organization that's abnormal, something trying to call out to a IP address or a source address that's not normal, that it's an abnormal occurrence of data transition in the organization, that it can flag that and recognize that as threatening, even though it's not an actual definition of a signature associated to an attack. So if you've got a good event log management system, maybe a SOC as a service program that can be leveraged, that can be looking for those type of behavioral anomalies in the organization, then you're one heads up against identifying and being able to preventive of a zero-day threat.
Appreciate it, Scott. I've got one more question I'm going to pose to the group. This one is about cloud. What are the downsides, or maybe one or a couple, depends on how you would answer it, of moving to the cloud? John, I'm going to toss this question over to you. What are some cons of a cloud shift?
Let me see here. So one of the cons is, and some people may actually see this as a pro too, is that kind of utility billing method. So we can see the positives in it, but also if you're paying for what you're using in there, proper management of your cloud environment is necessary, because we've seen where a client has, maybe spun up an extra firewall because they were just testing something and they never got rid of it. So it's been running, for $200 a month for 6 months before somebody saw it. So they just ate a huge cost on that. So there does need to be some management in there so that you're paying attention to your costs. And there's plenty of tools that allow you to do that. The other downside I could see is, the cloud isn't right for everybody. So sometimes it does make sense to keep some of your infrastructure local. If it is a very large reporting SQL server that requires some very fancy disks to it, you may be paying a good bit for that up in the cloud. Well, you may be able to do it cheaper on premise. So as much as we're seeing people go 100% to the cloud, we're also seeing a lot of these hybrid models too, and very few simply, all on premise.
Appreciate it, John. I don't know that we have enough time for like another whole question, but I do want to give Brennan the opportunity. Brennan, do you have maybe anything to add about potential downsides of moving to the cloud?
Sure. I mean, the probably the most blatant one is connectivity to the cloud, right? It's not if you put resources outside of the building, they are by definition, you have to have a link from the building to that place. So if that link goes down, therein lies some problems. Now, of course, there's ways around that, like, when we talk about SD-WAN and we talk about having multiple connections, that tries to get around that. But that is just simply one of the, the factors that it says, yeah, I mean, that's a consideration you have to have. So that's probably, Scott and John covered the other ones pretty well, but that's the first one that comes to mind for me.
I appreciate it, Brennan. And with that, because we're running up right on time, I'm going to close this webinar out. So a huge thanks to all of our panelists and the insights and experience they've shared around these sort of technology trends that we've covered today. Hopefully this session provided some food for thought for everyone, and you're able to come away from this webinar with some ideas maybe about how to better strategize and position your organization for success, through the end of this year and coming into next year, as it pertains to technology and maybe your IT roadmap and what you want that to look like for your business, for your people. And if you've got any additional questions, or if you'd like any resources or additional ideas or feedback on these topics, please feel free to reach out to us. Finally, we are going to be sharing these details around this webinar in an email with a link to the recording and some additional information too. So be sure to look for that to be shared in the next few days. And with that, I'm going to close the webinar out, and I hope everyone has a great Thursday. Thank you.
Stay diligent, everyone. Stay out of the headlines.
Stay diligent, for sure.